is a story about one of the most famous and popular heroes in English folklore. Nobody knows exactly when he lived. Indeed, no one can be absolutely sure that he ever lived at all. What is certain is that sometime before the end of the 14th century, 600 years ago, stories were being told and songs were being sung about a brave outlaw somewhere in central England who gathered around him a band of loyal followers. He was an incomparable archer. His great enemy was the Sheriff of Nottingham. He lived by hunting in the forest and robbing rich travelers. He was always kind and courteous to the poor and to women. And his name was Robin Hood.
It was a spring morning in the forest. The air was soft and cool and still. Here and there, glancing blades of sunlight cut through the spreading branches above to splash pools of brightness onto the forest floor among the darker greens. All was quiet. It seemed almost as if the whole of nature was holding its breath. But if you looked very closely, you might just make out the figure of a man moving through the glades and thickets. He was moving carefully, making no sound, and pausing often to search the area around him with his eyes. He was difficult to see because he was dressed completely in green, Lincoln green. His stockings of a light shade, his tunic darker, his cap darker still, with a long bird's feather stuck in it at a jaunty angle. His face and hands were brown and weathered. When he stopped and looked and listened, absolutely still, he merged so naturally into the background that he became virtually invisible. He was a young man of medium height, sturdily built and well-proportioned. At his back hung a longbow and a quiver of arrows. His step was light and easy. He was alone. He was, of course, Robin Hood. He progressed in this way for a long time, noticing everything, disturbing nothing, until the forest thinned out and he emerged on the bank of a fast-flowing river. There was full sunlight here and a broad path. And 100 yards downstream, the river was spanned by a tree trunk, roughly flattened on the top. Robin paused a moment, blinking a little in the brightness, and then he saw the figure of a man approaching the bridge from the other side of the river. He stepped out briskly then, only to notice that the other man had quickened his pace. So he went faster, almost running, and the other man did the same, with the result that they reached the opposite ends of the bridge at exactly the same moment. And it was only wide enough for one of them to cross at a time. "Wait there, young man," the stranger called. "I shall cross first." "Why should you have the precedence?" asked Robin. "Because I am older than you. Have you not been taught to defer to your elders?" "Yes, I have," called Robin, "and I would have given you the precedence gladly if you'd not demanded it so rudely. But since you were unmannerly, I shall demand in my turn." And so saying, he clipped an arrow into his bow and leveled it. "You behave like a coward," the stranger taunted. "You can see I have nothing but my quarterstaff. If you wish me to respect you as a man, then cut yourself a staff, and we will fight the matter out fairly." Robin agreed, and went to the forest edge to cut himself a stout oak staff about 4 feet long. As he returned, he looked closely at his adversary and began to wonder if he would not have been wiser to give way, for he was a massive man, nearly 7 feet tall, and everywhere in proportion, broad and solid and strong. "Are you ready yet?" came the call. "Aye, and more than ready for you, old fellow," replied Robin. "You will shortly regret that you called me a coward. Let us fight in the middle of the bridge, so that I may have the pleasure of knocking you into the river and washing away your manifold sins." They advanced towards each other until they stood a yard apart and right above the deep water. "Now we shall determine the right of way hereabouts." And with that, the stranger swung his quarterstaff in a swift and vicious arc. It would have cracked Robin's skull if he'd not seen it just in time and ducked under the whistling wood, then lunged forward with his own staff to catch the stranger a sharp blow in the ribs. The stranger gasped and stepped back a pace. Then he roared with anger and came forward with a flying volley of blows. Robin held his staff in both hands to use it as a shield, blocking and parrying, ducking and leaning back, praying that the stranger would swing so hard he might propel himself clean off the bridge. But the stranger knew what he was about. He not only managed to keep his balance, but time and again his staff rapped Robin's knuckles painfully, and occasionally he got through to catch Robin a stinging blow on the side of the head, to set his ears ringing and his senses reeling. It was hard work, like trying to ride a whirlwind, Robin thought. And he was just wondering whether the giant stranger would ever tire, when the quarterstaff swished even faster than before and caught Robin such a mighty buffet on the side of the head that he toppled from the bridge and plunged into the river. Robin was so hot and battered from the fight that the cold, fresh water had a soothing and reviving effect. When he bobbed to the surface a few yards downstream, he saw his victor kneeling on the bridge and peering anxiously down. "Here I am," called Robin. "The right-of-way is yours. If you would be so kind as to proceed across the bridge, we will rest a while together." "With the greatest of pleasure," the stranger replied. Robin clambered onto the riverbank to find the massive frame of the stranger stretched out comfortably in the sun, and a broad smile on his face. "Oh, you are the most ferocious wielder of the quarterstaff I ever came across," said Robin. "Tell me, what is your name?" "John Little." "It belies your stature, my friend. And what brings you to Sherwood Forest?" "I have been told the outlaw Robin Hood lives here, and I hope to meet him and perhaps join his company." "Why do you want to do that?" "Well, I have recently run into trouble with the authorities myself, and I believe this Robin Hood has gathered about him a band of men who have all run foul of the law in one way or another, and a foul law it is that turns such harmless souls as me into an outlaw. And I hear they lead a free life in the great forest, so I thought I would seek 'em out and offer my services." "Well, if you are as dangerous with the broadsword and the longbow as you are with the quarterstaff, then I believe he would welcome your services most heartily," said Robin. "Do you know the man, then?" "More than that. I am the man." "You? Robin? You were Robin Hood?" "None other." "Oh, then I'd best travel on. I cannot hope to take service with a man I've knocked into the river before I even introduce myself." "Yes, you can," said Robin, "and right welcome you are. We need such men as you in our company, and I have no doubt that your victory on the bridge there was the merest matter of luck." "Luck?" cried John Little. Then he caught Robin's twinkling eye and burst into a great roar of laughter. And when that had subsided, he took Robin's hand, still sore and raw from the flailing quarterstaff, in his great grasp and shook it long and painfully. As they walked along the forest tracks, Robin told his new companion about life under the greenwood tree, about his band of 40 outlaws, men like Will Scarlet and Much the miller's son, how they supported themselves by taking money from rich travellers, though they gave most of it away again to the poor peasants of the region, how they lived by hunting the game of the forest, the deer and partridges and rabbits. In those days, much of England was covered with great forests of oak and ash and beech, and most of the forests belonged by law to the king or the great nobleman. It was strictly forbidden for ordinary men to hunt the animals in these woods, and the penalty was death by hanging. "But what can a man do?" asked Robin. "They put us outside the protection of the law, so they give us no alternative but to live as best we can by our skill as hunters, and survive as best we can by avoiding the authorities. Here in Sherwood, our great enemy is the Sheriff of Nottingham. He has sworn to have my life, and more than once he's tried to capture me. So far, God be thanked, he's failed. But even so, I must be on my guard at all times, and I have to rely on the complete loyalty of my men." "You may trust me," said John Little. "Indeed, this path is so twisting and hidden, I do not think I could lead your enemies to your lair, even if I had a mind to betray you." "You will find your way about soon enough," Robin replied. "I chose this place because it is so remote and secret. The sheriff's men are not likely to stumble across it by accident, and it would take them months of searching, years even, to find it. But do you smell roasting venison? We're nearly there." And a moment later, they emerged suddenly into a wide clearing, completely surrounded by dense undergrowth. When Robin introduced John Little to his men and told the story of their meeting, some of them, Will Scarlet especially, were all for throwing him into the nearby stream. But Robin would not allow that. It had been a fair fight, he said, and a just victory. "Then I have another idea," said Will Scarlet. "Tonight we will turn our dinner into a christening party. We'll drink some of that fine red wine we were fortunate enough to find in the bishop's baggage train the other day, and give this new recruit a new name. He came to us as John Little. Now his life is changed. Let his new name, his Greenwood name, be Little John." There was a roar of approval, and though he stayed with Robin for many long years, and in time came to be his second-in-command and most trusted lieutenant, and though he never grew any smaller or slimmer, he was always known from that time on as Little John. A few days after Little John joined the band of outlaws, Robin took him, with Will Scarlet and a dozen others, on a journey northwards. He was looking for a second hidden home in the great forest of Barnesdale in South Yorkshire, some refuge they could escape to if the Sheriff of Nottingham ever made life too dangerous for them in Sherwood. It was late afternoon when they found a suitable place and decided to camp there. Robin set his men to clearing the ground and making it as spacious and comfortable as possible. Then he took 3 of them, Little John, Will Scarlet, and Much the miller's son, to one side. "I will go and find a fat deer for our supper, but I should like to see some guest at our table tonight, someone to share our meat and perhaps give us generous payment for it. So you 3 make your way to the Great North Road. It's only a mile to the east of here, and persuade some traveller, some rich traveller, to join us at supper." Little John had not been with them long enough to know all Robin's ways, and he didn't. Robin called an invitation to supper was what others, especially his guests, were more likely to call highway robbery. For he gave them no chance to refuse his invitation and made sure they paid as handsomely as they could afford. "What sort of guest do you want?" asked Little John. "Why, anyone you find passing along the road who looks as if he'd be able to pay well for his meal. Some prior or fat abbot, or a bishop, or a baron, or a knight. I like grand company when I dine. But if you see any women or men of humbler rank, peasants or small farmers, let them pass on their way." "Come on," said Will Scarlet. "I have been with Robin long enough to know his wishes. Be advised by me, and all will be well." The lengthening evening shadows of the great trees pointed the way for them, and they soon came to a wide stony track, Watling Street, the main road up the centre of England from north to south. They crouched in a low ditch at the roadside, their suits of Lincoln green blending into the grasses and ferns behind them. And they waited. It was a long time before anyone came. Little John, who was growing very hungry, was stirring impatiently, when Will Scarlet hissed, "Quiet! There's someone now coming from the north. A man on a horse, alone." The figure approached them slowly. "He's a knight, to judge from his appearance," whispered Much, the miller's son. "And a right miserable one, too," said Little John. "But I never saw a more dejected-looking fellow. I don't think he'll be very cheerful company for us at table." "Or able to pay much." "But he's our man all the same. There are too few travellers on this road, and my hunger is growing by the second." With that, he jumped from the ditch, dropped to one knee before the knight, and said, "My master bids you welcome, gentle knight, and invites your company at his table." "Who is your master?" asked the knight. "Robin Hood." "Why, then I will go with you gladly, for I have heard many tales of his kindness to the poor and needy, and have long wished to meet him." They dined well that evening, and when he'd finished, the knight thanked Robin graciously. "I thank you for your thanks," said Robin, "and for your company. But you must pay what you can for the meal. It would not be right for a knight such as you to let a poor yeoman